At 09:12 on the morning of March 7, 1945, Private Danny Kowalski told Sergeant Hayes he could clear the German machine gun nest on that ridge using the same calculation he used throwing fastballs at Comiskey Park. Hayes said that was the most insane thing he had heard since crossing the Rhine. Two men laughed. One said a baseball pitcher had no business throwing grenades at machine guns. Kowalski said he knew that. He had spent 9 years calculating release points, arm angles, and spin rates to put a baseball exactly where he wanted it at 90 miles per hour. A grenade weighed 21 ounces, had a 5-second fuse, and traveled on a parabolic arc. The physics was simpler than a curveball. He had been doing this calculation automatically for 9 years, and the machine gun nest was a fixed target at a known distance that was not going to move or swing at a bad pitch. He could solve this problem in his sleep. Hayes had 20 men pinned behind a stone wall with 100 Germans dug into a ridge 40 yards away and no other options on the table. He told Kowalski he had one throw to prove it. If you want to see what a Chicago White Sox pitcher did when 2 German machine guns had 20 Americans pinned behind a stone wall, hit the like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories like this. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Kowalski. Danny Kowalski grew up in Bridgeport, Chicago. His father worked at the stockyards 6 days a week. His older brother played semi-pro ball on weekends and took Danny to every game from the time he was old enough to sit still for 9 innings. Danny started throwing against the brick wall of the factory behind their house at age 8. He threw every day regardless of weather because throwing was free and the neighborhood had nothing else to offer. By 12 he was playing organized ball in the City League. By 14 his fastball was fast enough that older players stopped what they were doing to watch. By 17, a scout from the Chicago White Sox watched him throw for 20 minutes and offered him a tryout on the spot. The scout wrote in his report that Kowalski had the cleanest release mechanics he had seen at that age. What the scout meant was that Kowalski was already solving the geometry problem of pitching more accurately than most players twice his age. He had been solving it since he was 8 years old, throwing alone against a factory wall in Bridgeport without anyone to tell him how. He had figured it out himself by throwing the same throw 10,000 times and noticing what happened when his arm was right and what happened when it was wrong. Most people thought pitching a baseball was a physical skill. It was that, but underneath the physical skill was a geometry problem that had to be solved correctly on every single throw. The mound was 60 feet 6 inches from home plate. A fastball at 90 miles per hour covered that distance in 0.46 seconds. In those 0.46 seconds, the ball dropped 2.5 feet due to gravity. A pitcher who aimed directly at the strike zone would throw the ball 2.5 feet below it every time. He had to aim at a point in the air above the zone and let the ball drop into it. Get the release point wrong by half an inch, and the ball missed the corner by 6 inches at the plate. Get the arm angle wrong by 2 degrees and the ball ran off the edge instead of hitting it. Every variable mattered, and they all had to align simultaneously on every throw in every inning of every game. Kowalski spent 3 years in the White Sox minor league system learning to solve this geometry automatically, running the calculation before every pitch until it became instinct. He practiced the same pitches 10,000 times, not because repetition made him stronger, but because repetition made the calculation automatic, made it run below conscious thought, so that on the mound all he had to do was confirm the variables and let his arm execute the solution his brain had already calculated. By the time he made his major league debut in 1939 at age 22, the geometry ran without conscious thought. His fastball averaged 91 miles per hour. His curveball broke hard 12-6. His control was precise enough to hit a 2-inch corner at the edge of the strike zone on demand. The White Sox considered him a genuine rotation prospect. Pearl Harbor ended the 1942 season before it started. Kowalski enlisted in January, and the Army put him in infantry. They sent him to Europe in 1943. By March 1945, he was with Charlie Company, 78th Infantry Division, pushing into Germany from the west after the Rhine crossing at Remagen. Most German resistance was collapsing by then, but individual units dug in and fought hard regardless of what was happening elsewhere. The ridge outside the village of Neustadt was one of those places. The Germans had 2 MG-42 machine guns in reinforced positions on the crest. The MG-42 fired 1,200 rounds per minute, and at 40 yards it did not miss. Charlie Company had been trying to take this ridge since dawn. 3 men were dead. Hayes had pulled the rest back to a stone wall 40 yards from the base of the ridge, and they had been pinned there for 2 hours. Artillery was not coming. The ridge was too close to the American position for safe fire. Direct assault meant crossing 40 yards of open ground under 2 MG-42s simultaneously. Nobody in Charlie Company was willing to do that, and Hayes could not order them to. He had requested support from every source available. None was coming. He had been sitting behind this wall for 2 hours, and he had exhausted every option he had except the one he had not thought of yet. At 09:12, after 2 hours behind the wall with nothing working, Hayes heard Kowalski speak. Kowalski said he could put grenades into both German positions from behind cover. Hayes said 40 yards was too far to throw a grenade accurately from a covered position. Kowalski said it was not too far. He had been throwing objects precisely at 60 feet and beyond for 9 years. A grenade weighed 21 ounces, about the same as a baseball, and it traveled on a parabolic arc. He could calculate the same way he calculated every pitch. The machine gun nest was a fixed target at a known distance. He knew the grenade weight, the fuse timing, and the distance. He could solve the geometry. Hayes said baseball was nothing like combat. Kowalski said the physics was identical. Release angle determined arc height. Release velocity determined distance. Fuse timing determined detonation point. These were the same variables he solved on the mound. If anything, the grenade was easier than a pitch. It did not need to hit a 2-inch corner of the strike zone. It needed to land inside a 6-foot machine gun position. Hayes had been throwing his whole life without thinking about it as geometry. He had no framework for what Kowalski was describing. But he had no other options. And 3 dead men behind him and the ridge sitting 40 yards away as impassable as it had been at dawn. Hayes said if Kowalski missed and the grenade fell short, they were all dead. Kowalski said he would not miss. Hayes gave him 1 throw. Kowalski took his time. His pitching coach had taught him that rushing a throw was the most common cause of mistakes. Before you threw, you confirmed the variables. He checked the distance, 40 yards, roughly 120 feet, twice the distance from the mound to home plate. He studied the target, the left German position, a sandbag parapet on the ridge crest, about 6 feet wide and 4 feet deep, a muzzle flash location he had been watching for 2 hours. He felt the weight of the grenade in his right hand and compared it to a baseball, heavier by about 3 ounces. He adjusted the required arm speed upward accordingly. He calculated the arc. To clear the stone wall, travel 40 yards, and drop into the position he needed approximately a 45-degree release angle and enough arm speed to generate the distance with a flight time under 3 seconds. The fuse ran 4 to 5 seconds. He needed the grenade landing before that. The calculation took about 8 seconds. He had made harder calculations than this on the mound while a manager was walking out to pull him and a pennant was on the line. He pulled the pin. He stood up above the stone wall, completely exposed. The German machine gun opened on him immediately, rounds cracking past his head and striking the wall around him. He had pitched in front of 40,000 people with a pennant on the line. He knew how to narrow his focus entirely to the mechanics and let everything outside that become background noise. His arm came up, elbow high, the same motion as 10,000 previous throws. He released at the calculated angle and dropped immediately behind the wall. The grenade cleared the wall, traveled the arc, and dropped into the left machine gun position. The explosion was definitive. The MG-42 stopped firing. 4 seconds of silence. Then the right machine gun opened up. Hayes was staring at Kowalski. The men along the wall were looking at each other. Nobody said anything. They had all watched Kowalski stand fully upright under machine gun fire in a baseball pitcher's throwing motion and put a grenade into a 6-foot target at 40 yards on the first attempt. Now the right machine gun was still firing, and Kowalski was already calculating the second throw. The right position was slightly further. He estimated 43 yards, and it was offset to the right at about 15 degrees from his throwing position. Not a straight throw, an angled one. In baseball terms, a slider rather than a fastball. The mechanics shifted slightly. The release point moved right. The arm angle adjusted for the lateral component. He had thrown thousands of sliders. He knew exactly what a 15-degree lateral angle required at this weight and distance. The calculation took 6 seconds. He pulled the second pin. He stood up again. The right machine gun tracked to him immediately, and he heard rounds hit the wall directly beside his hands. He released and dropped. The second grenade traveled the adjusted arc and dropped into the right machine gun position. The second MG-42 went silent. Hayes told his men to move. Charlie Company crossed the 40 yards to the base of the ridge in the silence the 2 grenades had created, and took the position in 4 minutes. 14 Germans in those 2 machine gun positions. None survived the grenades. The remaining 86 Germans on the ridge withdrew rather than fight without machine gun support. Taking the ridge cost Charlie Company no additional casualties. Hayes filed his after-action report that evening. He wrote that Private Kowalski had destroyed 2 German machine gun positions at 40 yards by throwing grenades from behind cover, and attributed the accuracy to Kowalski's experience as a professional baseball pitcher. He noted that both throws had landed inside the target positions on the first attempt. He spent some time trying to find the right military language for what he had watched. He had been in combat for 2 years, and he had never seen anything that looked like what Kowalski did behind that wall. A man standing upright under machine gun fire in a pitcher's throwing motion, releasing a grenade at a calculated angle, dropping back behind cover before the explosion. He wrote exceptional skill under fire and let it stand at that. He recommended Kowalski for a Bronze Star. The citation mentioned exceptional courage and skill in destroying enemy positions under fire. It did not mention Comiskey Park or the 9 years of calculating release angles that had made the throws possible. Kowalski continued with Charlie Company through the final weeks of the campaign and used grenade throws in 3 more engagements. The calculation worked each time. Weight, distance, angle, fuse time. The solution changed with each position. The method never changed. Germany surrendered in May 1945. Kowalski came home in August. The White Sox offered him a contract, and he reported to spring training in 1946. His fastball was still 89 miles per hour. His curveball still broke 12-6. His control was exactly what it had been before the war. 3 years of infantry had not touched his arm mechanics. The geometry was still in there, exactly as he had left it in 1941. He made the White Sox rotation in 1947 and pitched in the major leagues until 1952, 14 games, 67 wins, 891 strikeouts, 3.42 ERA. He was not a Hall of Famer. He was a solid major league pitcher who had a long career and who in the spring of 1947 was doing exactly what he had been working toward since he was 8 years old, throwing against a factory wall in Bridgeport. Every pitch he threw in those 6 seasons used the same geometry he had used on a German ridge in 1945. The batters in the American League did not know that. The fans in the stands at Comiskey Park did not know it. His catcher knew he was reliable. His manager knew he could be trusted in close games. That was enough. After his last season in 1952, a sports writer doing a feature on veteran ballplayers asked him about his time in the service. Kowalski told the story of the ridge. The sports writer wrote it up and it ran on page 14 of the sports section. Most readers skipped it to get to the box scores. One who did not was his old pitching coach from the minor leagues. The coach sent him a letter saying he always knew the geometry would be useful. He had not expected it to be useful in exactly that way. Kowalski wrote back and said it was the most important thing anyone had ever taught him. He retired to the Chicago suburbs and coached youth baseball for 20 years. He taught every kid who came through his program the same thing his coach had taught him. Throwing is geometry. Release angle, velocity, distance. Before you throw anything, you calculate where it needs to go and you release it on the line that gets it there. The ball will go where the geometry says it will go if your arm executes the calculation correctly. Most kids thought this was complicated. Kowalski told them it was not complicated. It was just math. The math was the same every time. The only thing that changed was whether your arm was disciplined enough to do what your brain calculated. He spent 20 years teaching kids to confirm the variables before they threw. Some of them became very good pitchers. A few played college ball. One made it to the minor leagues. All of them learned that throwing was not a mystery. It was a problem with a correct solution, and you could find the solution if you understood the variables. He never told the kids about Germany. He never mentioned the ridge or the 2 machine guns, or the 2 throws that opened the way for Charlie Company in 30 seconds. He just taught them to throw correctly and let the geometry do the rest. He died in 1989 at age 72. His obituary in the Chicago Tribune mentioned his career with the White Sox, his coaching, and his military service. It listed his career statistics. It did not mention Neustadt or the grenades or the calculation his sergeant had called insane before it worked twice in 30 seconds. His son found a box in the attic after he died. Inside, his White Sox jersey, a baseball signed by his 1947 teammates, and the Bronze Star in its case. Next to the Bronze Star, a small piece of paper in Kowalski's handwriting. 2 sets of numbers. First, 40 yards, 21 os, 45 degrees, 3 seconds. The calculation for the first throw. Second, 43 yards, 21 os, 42 degrees, 15-degree lateral, 3 seconds. The calculation for the second throw. His son recognized the format immediately. He had watched his father write those same kinds of numbers on notepads during games his entire childhood, working out pitching mechanics between starts. The geometry his father learned on a minor league mound in 1937 was the same geometry on that piece of paper from Germany in 1945. The numbers were different. The method was the same. If this story moved you the way it moved us, hit that like button. Every like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We are rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about people whose skills were built for one purpose and used for another, whose names ended up in an obituary, but whose methods changed the outcome of battles. Drop a comment right now. Tell us where you are watching from. Tell us if you played baseball. Tell us if someone in your family served in Germany in 1945. Let us know you are here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for making sure Danny Kowalski and his pitching geometry do not disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered.